Welcome to Graveyard Diaries, where fear has a voice and every story leaves a scar. Here, we explore the darkest corners of reality, where true horror and haunting fiction collide. If you dare to listen, you're already part of the tale. Before we dive deep into this story, subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful and thought-provoking stories. Let's go in deep. They said the place was cursed. Saint Elora's Asylum stood at the edge of a forgotten forest, wrapped in vines and fog, isolated from the world like a wound that never healed. Nobody in town spoke about it, not even in whispers. Locals avoided the road that led there. Taxi drivers refused to go near it, and those who lived closest to it swore they heard voices in the wind when it passed through the trees. That should have been enough to keep me away, but curiosity has a way of becoming obsession, especially when you've spent years chasing stories others are too afraid to tell. I was a documentary filmmaker looking for the next big scare, the kind of story that would make people's skin crawl, and Saint Elora's was the perfect nightmare. It was closed in 1972 after a fire ripped through the east wing. Reports claimed it was an electrical issue, a simple accident, but the numbers didn't add up. 23 patients and 4 staff members were listed as missing, never found, never identified. No remains, no funerals, no official explanations, just blackened walls and silence. Even stranger, the fire didn't spread far. Only one wing was damaged. The rest of the asylum remained eerily intact, as if untouched by the chaos that swallowed the others whole. That mystery alone was enough to get me packing. I loaded my camera gear, voice recorder, backup batteries, and a flashlight into my truck and set off down the cracked road through the hills, unaware of what waited on the other side. The GPS failed 10 minutes before I arrived. The signal vanished completely. The dirt road narrowed as the trees thickened, branches clawing at my windows like fingers trying to pull me back. The asylum finally came into view at sunset. It rose from the ground like a forgotten tomb, tall and wide and dark, its windows boarded, its roof sagging in places. The gate was still intactian, rusted, with twisted bars bent outward, as if something had broken out instead of in. My stomach twisted, but I told myself it was just nerves. I'd been to creepy places before, old prisons, abandoned hospitals, but this felt different, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The moment I stepped out of the car, I noticed how quiet. It was no birds, no wind, just stillness, heavy and unnatural. The kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I opened the gate slowly. It creaked like a scream held too long in someone's throat. I hesitated at the front steps, the wood soft and warped beneath my boots. The door to the main building stood half open, swaying gently like it had been, waiting for someone. Inside, it was cold, much colder than outside. My breath fogged in front of me, even though it was the middle of summer. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with shattered glass and fallen ceiling tiles. Wheelchairs and stretchers were scattered across the floor, as if people had left in a rush. Some of the lights overhead flickered, even though the building hadn't had power in decades. My camera glitched the moment I turned it on. Static, then silence, then static again. The walls were covered in patient records, scribbled notes, torn photographs. I picked up a chart from the floor. The name was scratched out violently, but a word was written across the top in red ink. Subject, not patient. Subject. I moved deeper, stepping over overturned filing cabinets and old restraints. The air grew heavier the further I went, like I was walking underwater. Then I saw the wing where the fire had happened, blackened walls, burnt gurneys, and near the far end, a door still intact, metal, unmarked, bolted shut from the outside. I raised my camera to record it. That's when I heard the first sound in the building since I arrived. A faint shuffle, like bare feet on tile, coming from the darkness behind me. I turned toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Just the dim hallway stretching out behind me, flickering in and out of shadow as the lights above buzzed faintly. I waited, holding my breath, trying to listen through the pounding in my ears. Nothing, just silence again, thick and endless. I told myself it was rats or wind or maybe just the building settling, the way old places do. But something about it felt deliberate, like someone had taken a step forward and then stopped just out of sight. I backed away slowly, turning toward the metal door at the end of the burned corridor. The air was colder here, biting at my skin like ice. I reached for the handle out of instinct, but it didn't move. It was locked tight, rusted, bolted. I looked for another way around, and that's when I noticed something lying nearby on the floor, a small leather-bound book, half burnt along the edges, its spine barely holding the pages together. I knelt and picked it up. The cover was unmarked, but when I opened it, the first thing I saw was a name written in delicate cursive, Evelyn Hart. My fingers froze. That was the same name I had seen on the journal at the estate sale, the one that first led me here. Flipped through the pages, careful not to tear the fragile paper. Most of it was unreadable, smudged with ash or warped by heat. But some entries remained intact, and what I read made my blood turn to ice. Evelyn was a nurse at the asylum, assigned to ward see the wing that burned. Her entries started normal enough. Patient conditions, dosage schedules, routine notes. But as the pages went on, her handwriting changed. It became erratic, unsteady, panicked. She wrote about hearing voices when no one else was around, doors opening and closing on their own, patients speaking in tongues she didn't recognize. Then there was one entry, dated just 3 days before the fire, that stood out above all the others. It was written hastily, like she hadn't had much time. The ink was smeared in places, as if she'd been crying while she wrote it. She talked about a woman someone she called the humming patient. A woman who was admitted under a false name, with no medical records, no history, and no visitors. No one remembered seeing her arrive. No one knew which doctor had approved her intake. Evelyn said the woman never spoke. She only hummed. A slow, strange melody, the same one over and over again, like a lullaby that had no end. Other patients became obsessed with her. They would sit outside her cell for hours, listening, unmoving. One even gouged out his own eyes after whispering something about seeing her face inside his dreams. Nurses refused to go near her. Doctors stopped writing her name in the records. But the humming never stopped. It echoed through the vents, drifted through the walls, always soft, always close, no matter where you were in the building. The last thing Evelyn wrote, scrawled in capital letters across an entire page, was, "Don't listen to her humming." And below it, smaller, barely legible, as if she had written it while shaking, "If you hear it, it's already too late." I closed the journal and sat there for a long time, not moving, not blinking, just listening. At first, there was only silence, but slowly, underneath the sound of my breathing and the distant creaking of the asylum's bones, I heard something, faint, barely there. a slow, haunting melody coming from somewhere deep inside the building. The humming grew louder the deeper I walked into the asylum. It wasn't just a sound, it felt like something alive, slithering through the air, curling around my ears, burrowing into my mind. No words, just a melody. Soft, repetitive, unnatural. I kept telling myself it had to be in my head, some residual fear messing with my senses. But every time I stopped moving, it continued, steady, closer. I tried to focus on the path ahead, but something strange began to happen. The hallways no longer matched the floor plan I'd studied. I had memorized it before coming. I knew which wing led where. But now, doors that should have led to the cafeteria opened into padded cells. Emergency exits led to staircases spiraling, down into places that didn't exist on the blueprint. It was as if the asylum was changing, twisting, reacting to me. The humming didn't come from one direction, it came from all of them, above me, behind the walls, beneath the floor. I turned, corners that led to dead ends that hadn't been there seconds earlier. I walked through the same hallway 3 times, but each time it looked worse. The first time, the wallpaper was faded. The second, it was peeling in long strips. The third time, it was soaked through with something dark and dripping. My flashlight started flickering, no matter how many fresh batteries I used. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, never full figures, just shapes, outlines, as if people were standing just around the corner, waiting. I called out, trying to convince myself it was just echoes bouncing strangely off old walls. But the moment I spoke, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. I stood there, frozen, not even breathing, afraid that the act of exhaling might trigger something I wasn't ready to see. Then, without warning, every door in the hallway slammed shut at once. The sound was deafening, like gunfire ricocheting through a tomb. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into thick, unnatural darkness. I stumbled forward, using the wall to guide me, my fingers brushing along cracked paint and cold metal. Then I saw light. A soft glow coming from underneath a nearby door. It flickered like candlelight. I moved toward it cautiously, every step slow, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might drown out everything else. I reached the door and gently pushed it open. Inside was a small room, untouched by decay. Clean, almost pristine. A single chair sat in the center, and a child's music box rested on the floor beside it. It was open, spinning slowly, playing that same humming tune I had been hearing through the halls. Only now I could tell it wasn't a recording. It was someone humming, mimicking the music box perfectly, hiding behind the sound. The walls of the room were covered in photographs, all of them black and white, all of them of the same woman. Her face was blurred in every shot, her mouth always slightly open, as if caught mid-home. Her eyes, they were black pits, even in the photos. No whites, no reflections, just voids. I picked up one of the pictures and felt a cold sensation run up my arm, like I was holding something that didn't want to be touched. I dropped it and backed away. The humming stopped again. I heard something shift in the room, like someone shifting their weight, rising slowly from a crouch. But I couldn't see anyone. The room was too small for someone to hide. I turned toward the hallway to leave, but it wasn't there anymore. The door had vanished. The walls had shifted again. I wasn't in the same part of the building anymore. The music box continued to play, even though no one was touching it, and the light in the room began to dim as if being swallowed by something just beneath the floor. The air turned foul, thick with the scent of burned cloth and rotting flowers. I followed the flickering light down a corridor that seemed unfamiliar, even though I was certain I had walked it minutes before. The walls were damp now, sweating, almost pulsing with a faint throb like veins just beneath the surface. Water dripped from the ceiling in rhythmic plinks, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the thick air like the asylum was breathing around me. I moved forward slowly, unsure if I was going deeper or simply circling the same cursed space. Every few feet, my flashlight would dim, and for a split second, I'd catch glimpses of things in the darkness, arms pressed against glass, eyes watching from cracks in the walls, mouths whispering but making no sound. Each time the beam returned, everything would vanish, leaving only silence and a smell of iron hanging in the air. I found myself at a hallway that had no lights at all. At the end of it, barely visible, was a single door painted white, but stained with something dark that had dripped down the sides. It was marked Room 12. The number had been scratched over and over into the door frame, as if someone had tried to carve it deeper with their fingernails. The handle was cold and rusted, yet when I reached for it, it turned without resistance. The door swung open with a slow, aching creak. Inside was a small room with padded walls, but the padding had been ripped apart. Yellow foam spilled out like intestines from long slashes. The floor was covered in claw marks deep, jagged grooves torn violently into the concrete. Some were fresh. The overhead light flickered dimly, casting long shadows that bent unnaturally, stretching toward the corners of the room as if trying to escape. In the middle sat a single wooden chair, too ordinary to belong in a padded cell. It was old, with one leg slightly shorter than the others, and its back was tied with strands of what looked like braided hair. The chair was rocking gently when I stepped in. No wind, no vibration, nothing to make it move. Yet it rocked, slow and steady, like someone had just stood up from it. I froze, watching it creak forward and back, each motion groaning like old bones. I held up the flashlight, but the beam flickered again, and this time it didn't recover. I was left in the half-light of the single dying bulb, above casting shadows that moved even when I didn't. I stepped closer to the chair. Something was off about the floor beneath it. The claw marks, there formed a pattern, a spiral carved so precisely it didn't match the panic of the others. In the center of the spiral was a small object, partially buried under dust. I reached down and pulled it free, a tattered photograph. It was water-stained and bent, but I could make out two figures, a doctor in a white coat, smiling stiffly, and behind him, a woman with long black hair, her face turned just slightly, as if trying to avoid the camera. Her hand rested on his shoulder, fingers thin and unnaturally long, the nails digging in. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. The chair had stopped rocking. It now stood perfectly still, facing me. The light above buzzed louder, pulsing in time with something I couldn't see. I backed away slowly, but the air behind me felt thicker, like something was standing just outside my reach, pressing against the back of my neck with invisible fingers. The smell of the room had changed, now reeked of scorched fabric and decaying flowers, like something long buried had been unearthed. I heard a breath close to my ear, steady and slow, not mine. Something exhaled just behind me, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My limbs felt frozen, like they no longer answered to me. Then I heard it again, low and drawn out. Soft creaking of the chair rocking once more, but now it wasn't empty anymore. I could hear the sound of skin sliding against wood, the faint creak of weight settling into the seat, and the humming returned, louder, clearer, coming from right in front of me, even though no one was visible in the light. The humming followed me as I left the padded cell. It wasn't behind me anymore, it was around me, above, below, in the walls. It slid under the floorboards and leaked from vents I hadn't noticed before. It was getting stronger, not louder, but heavier, like it was pressing into my head with invisible fingers. My hands were trembling as I moved down the corridor, the flashlight in my grip flickering erratically. Every few steps it would catch a glimpse of something just out of frame movement. That vanished before I could focus. At first I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks, but the air had changed again. It tasted metallic, thick, and hot like old breath. Then I saw the mirror. It was cracked, long, and bolted to the wall in a hallway that was otherwise completely bare. No furniture, no debris, no light fixtures, just peeling paint and that mirror. I stepped closer. My reflection was there, but something about it wasn't right. The delay, a half-second lag between me and the image. I raised my hand slowly and watched the reflection follow, but not exactly in sync. When I stopped, it kept moving, just a little, just enough to notice. My face looked pale, stretched, like the image had been warped by heat or water. Then something shifted in the glass. At first I thought it was a smudge, but then I saw her standing behind me in the reflection. A nurse. Her uniform was white and spotless, but her face was wrong. There were no eyes in her sockets, just smooth, empty skin where her eyes should have been. Her mouth was slightly open, lips trembling as if she were trying to speak, but had no voice. Her head tilted slowly, unnaturally far, like her neck was made of rubber. I spun around. Nothing was there. The hallway behind me was empty, dead silent. But when I looked back at the mirror, she was still there, closer now. I could see the stitching across her jaw, like someone had tried to sew it shut and failed. She mouthed something, over and over, slow, deliberate. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what they were. I could feel them in my bones. She never left. My breath caught in my throat as my reflection began to change. My skin in the mirror turned grey, the veins beneath growing dark and pronounced. My eyes blackened at the center, spreading like ink in water. My mouth began to move, not of my own will. I watched myself repeat the words she was mouthing. My voice didn't come out of my mouth, it came from the mirror. She never left. The humming swelled again, vibrating through the walls, rattling the bolts, holding the mirror in place. A crack splintered across the glass, then another. The sound of breaking glass filled my ears as the mirror shattered, the shards hovering in midair for just a second too long before falling to the floor. I stared down at the pieces, each reflecting my face, but not the one I knew. Each shard showed a version of me, more decayed, more hollow, as if I was seeing different timelines of myself unraveling at once. Then, in one of the shards, I saw her again, not behind me, not in the reflection. This time, she was crouched beside me, her hand reaching out. Her fingers touched the edge of the glass, and it felt warm, wet. I blinked, and she was gone, but the shard was smeared with something, red, like fresh blood. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, slick with sweat. The lights above me blinked once, twice, then died completely, leaving me in darkness. The air was still, but I could feel something breathing beside me, slow and heavy. The mirror was gone, And so was the hallway behind me. I was somewhere else now, someplace deeper. The walls were covered in scratches again, and the humming was louder than ever. I could feel it vibrating through my chest, rising from the floor as if the entire asylum had become a living, humming thing, and I was now trapped inside its body. I moved blindly through the dark, guided only by the flickering pulse of my dying flashlight and the gut-wrenching instinct that something was circling me. The halls were no longer familiar. They curved unnaturally, bent in ways that defied logic. I passed the same broken wheelchair 3 times, each time a little closer to the wall, as if it had moved on its own. I tried retracing my steps, counting doorways, touching the walls, anything to ground myself, but nothing helped. I was no longer walking through a building. I was wandering inside something alive, something that adjusted itself to trap me further with each turn. Then I saw the exit sign, glowing faintly in the distance, a small red promise in the darkness. I ran toward it, breath tight in my throat, lungs burning. The hallway seemed to stretch the faster I moved, but I pushed on. I reached the door and flung it open, only to find myself staring at the same hallway I had just run through. Same cracked walls, same blood-stained tiles, same humming, now louder, sharper, rising like a scream just behind the walls. I slammed the door shut and backed away, heart pounding, trying not to let panic take over. I turned down another hallway and another, each time hoping to find stairs, an open window, something that led out, but every path took me back to the same place, room 12. The door was always closed when I found it. I never heard it open, but somehow it was always waiting. I refused to enter again, so I kept walking. I thought maybe if I ignored the patterns, the place would break its hold. But then the whispering started. Soft at first, garbled like voices coming from behind a wall, desperate and fast. They weren't in one place, they came from everywhere. I pressed my ear against a cracked tile and heard dozens of them speaking. At once, crying, begging, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The words crawled through my skull, slippery and cold, leaving behind a headache that felt like something was burrowing behind my eyes. I stepped away, and the walls began to groan. Not from decay, but as if they were flexing, stretching, reacting. Then I heard the footsteps, dozens of them, bare feet slapping against tile in uneven, unnatural rhythms. I turned around and saw them, figures coming from the darkness, patients, emaciated, pale, twisted. Their jaws hung open at unnatural angles, some of them dislocated entirely. Their eyes were hollow. One had his neck bent so far sideways it touched his shoulder. Another dragged a broken leg behind him, the bone sticking out in a splintered hook. And they were all whispering, not to each other, to me. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't make sense of until they repeated. Again and again, you heard her. Now she hears you. I backed away, stumbling, trying to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. They pointed at me, with hands that bent the wrong way, long fingers trembling. As they drew closer, the humming reached its peak. My flashlight blew out with a quiet pop, plunging everything into black. I felt them surrounding me, cold breath on my neck, fingertips brushing against my arms. One whispered directly into my ear, the sound not a word but a vibration that made my teeth ache. I closed my eyes. Something touched my face, gently, like a mother's hand, then nails scraped across my scalp. Another voice hummed just behind my ear, perfectly in tune with the one that had haunted me since I arrived. They were all humming now, every patient, every voice, one terrible chorus, and then the floor gave out. Not physically, but the sensation hit me hard, like falling through myself, through space, through time. The walls turned to ash, the ceiling melted into shadow. I felt weightless and crushed at the same time, pulled somewhere deeper than the asylum, somewhere beyond it. Like the building had never existed at all, and I had simply crossed into something far older, far hungrier, something that had only been pretending to be a place made of stone and memory and rot.